Many thanks to the Data Diva Talks Privacy Podcast sponsor and privacy visionary, Smartbox AI, for sponsoring this episode and also supporting our podcast. Smartbox AI, named British AI Company of the Year, provides cutting edge AI helping privacy and technology experts uniquely master their data request challenges and make it easier to comply with global data protection requirements, FOIA requests, and various U.S. state privacy regulations. Their technology is a game changer for anyone needing to sift through complex data, find data, redact sensitive information. With clients across North America and Europe, and a major partnership with Xerox, Smartbox AI is bringing their data expertise right to your doorstep, offering insights into navigating the complex world of global data laws. And for information about Smartbox AI, visit their website at www.smartbox.ai. Enjoy the show. The personal views expressed by our podcast guests are their own and are not legal advice or official statements by their organizations. Hello, my name is Debbie Reynolds. They call me the Data Diva. This is the Data Diva Talks Privacy podcast, where we discuss data privacy issues with industry leaders around the world with information that businesses need to know now. I have a very special guest on the show, actually a friend. We've known each other for many years, Paul Starrett. He is the co-founder of PrivacyLabs, also the founder of Starrett Law. His area is AI governance, technology, law, and cyber risk. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And yes, I would concur that we are good friends and you're a respected colleague of mine.
Well, I always like to start the show with the origin story of how we met. So we met in Carmel, California. We were attending a conference there. And I think both of us were speakers. You had just come over and started talking to me, and we had the most riveting conversation. So you are a data person like me. You're a data scientist. And so we just had so much fun talking, and we kept in touch over the years. I've been super impressed with what you do. When people call me and ask me about a data person, you're like almost the first person I call. It's like, oh, call Paul. He knows.
Well, I appreciate that. I'll pay you later for that. But
Yeah.
let me just add, if I could, to that real briefly, is I went to your presentation and I really appreciated your perspective on the panel you were on. And so, yes, then there was the meet and greet. And I think that I was approaching you about some of your comments. So it was something that we hit it off early on. So it's been great ever since.
Yeah, it's great. And I'm glad that we finally got a chance to do this show after many years. But tell your story, tell your data story. How did you end up where you are and all the things that you're interested in around data?
Great, thank you. I would probably omit the first third of my life as basically youthful exploration, but I did start out in the area of security, sort of in investigations and audit. And then in the late 90s, it kind of date me here, I decided that it was a good idea to go technical. So I was a programmer in information security for RSA security for about 4 years, 5 years with another company called Network Associates, which is McAfee. But anyway, that's where I got my exposure to information security, into technology generally. And as we sort of fast forward through this process, I went to law school at night and took the bar and passed. And again, I'm skipping over a lot here, but eventually, about 10 years ago, I decided to get into AI and law formally. Ever since then, I got a master's degree in data science in 2016, and I was the first chair of the American Bar Association Big Data Committee in 2013 through 2020, and literally lived and breathed this topic. And so I really span all what I would call the technical verticals within the area of AI. So the ability to define risks and controls and mitigations is really something that I feel I'm well placed to do. And so I guess that's basically it. And then met you along the way, and so here we are.
Yeah, that is definitely the short version of your journey, but it was a very well mapped journey. I like the way that you've navigated your career and the way that you've
Thank
positioned
you.
yourself. You're a rarity, I think, especially someone who is a lawyer who understands, you sort of came to it from the data side first
I
before you
did.
kind of got into law. So
Yeah.
tell me how is that? I know that let's just talk a little bit about legal. My
Yeah.
impression of legal after having, advised in that space for a really long time is
Yes.
that a lot of times legal is dragged kicking and screaming into the future.
Yes.
But what are your thoughts about that? Is that changing? Is it different? Is it the
Hmm.
same? What do you think?
Well, that's a good question, and I have to be, respectful, I suppose, of my colleagues. Although I will tell you, I am not your typical. I don't have a typical pedigree in law. I went at night. I never really cared to work for a big firm. I was much more technical, far more technical actually. And so my journey was more on that side of the fence. So I didn't really live the life of an attorney proper, even though I've been general counsel, things like that. But to your question, I think really what happens is people kind of make a decision early in their life what they're going to do. A lot of people who are in law are sort of the writing skills, communication skills types, and they're not the detail oriented hard science types. And the reverse can be true too. So you kind of start with that as your basic constituency, if you will. And so I think that it is generally well behind the technology curve. That's kind of expected on some level. It's on another level, I hate to say this, but it's not excusable in some cases because technology is not that hard to grasp. My path, I'm not naturally technical, but if you break things down into component parts, relax, and work through it, it's very doable. So I would say that we are probably a 3 or 4 out of 10 of where we should be. And I think the reason why it's important for us to be more insistent on bringing that data literacy, if you will, that technology literacy up is because we live in a digital world. And in order to do that, we really have to speak its language. We have to understand the value and the risks that are associated with it. And so when I approach a problem, I'm able to look at the technology at a very detailed level and find the risk and say, hey, this is really important. Or to look across and say, well, how does one thing pull on another and tug on something else to kind of get that lower level kind of ecosystem holistic approach. So I, I hope that's answered your question. I think it's coming along. It's always been, like you said, they're always dragged kicking and screaming into the fire pit or the fray. And I think it's that even more so with AI, though they really are coming along. The IAPP has their AIG, artificial intelligence governance certification, and there's been a strong, interest in that.
This is what I think that's changed, and I want your thoughts. So, I go back way, way back as well, right? So I
Hmm.
say I've been helping companies with digital transformation before digital was in it. It was
Hmm.
just
Hmm.
transformation back then, right?
Yep.
And back then, technology was like, eh, maybe it was a fad. Maybe people thought, well, I can still do things manually, but if I wanted to do it this different way, I had an option where I could do it in a technical or digital way. And
Mm-hmm.
what we found is that once we moved more into digital systems or records and things like that, it was just impossible to do it manually anymore because of the
Hmm.
amount of data, the complexity, and things like that.
Yep.
And so the change to me was that back then, I think just adding information to digital spaces wasn't thought of as critical. It was sort
Hmm.
of
Hmm.
optional, and maybe people thought of it as a novelty at that time. And I'm going way back when people started putting computers in law firms. People who got those computers were secretaries. They weren't the
Yeah.
lawyers and stuff like that. So I think there was a bit of a little caste system thing happening with technology, and we're sort of
Hmm.
seeing that still play out. But I think the difference, what's happened over the convening years, is that you basically can't do your job without technology, right? So it's not an
Absolutely.
add-on, a tack-on thing. It's like you need
No.
to respect the profession and respect people who help you do your job. You literally can't do your
Yep.
job without it. What do you think?
Yes. And I'm going to go maybe even farther back. when the horse and buggy, right? And we got the car, right? So who wants to take a horse to work when they get there in, a tenth of the time and they don't have to feed the horse and stuff? I do remember some of that actually. Remember the big data craze back in the late 2000s, early 2010s, when the word big data, everyone remembers that. Where you did have volumes of data and you really had to learn how to wrangle that. So I think for everyone, there's a natural kind of learning curve and adoption curve that you can't avoid because there is such a thing as rushing the general status quo into something. Because if you go too fast, you wind up with a net loss. So yes, I do have a recollection of that. I do think, if I may, it kind of is a repeat of what we're seeing with generative AI. Well, never mind normal machine learning, but I think, as you said, it helps you do your job. We're on the audio here. In the background, you have an AI tool that is transcribing what we're saying, right? Think about how valuable that is, how much time it's saving you. And the risk is really nominal. So think of how that alone, very kind of immediate example there. It's like, oh yeah, and how is the AI built to create that capability? I transcribe my emails. I speaking to voice thing, it saves me enormous amount of time. So I agree. I think it's something where it becomes the new normal. It becomes the new car, the new SaaS platform, whatever. It's just keeping up with progress.
You and I, we talked a couple of weeks ago, and we actually had this
Hmm.
detailed conversation about just note-taking apps in general. And
Hmm.
I had known someone that put a post up, and their idea is like, "Oh, I would never have a client use a note-taking app." And it was
Hmm.
like, you might as well be in the Stone Age as far as I'm concerned. So let's talk about risk.
Hmm. Yeah.
How risky is it, Paul, that you and I are using a note-taking app right now? Probably not. No risk, really. I don't feel any risk here, right? Maybe there are some situations where people feel risk, but to try to say it's an all or nothing thing about using technology, I think that's, very kind of a Luddite type of
Well,
way. And it's not practical.
yes, Luddite's a great word for that. I think that makes it a very sort of pedestrian way of looking at how do you approach AI governance generally. Is you look at what's the value and what's the downside. During this discussion, we're not really dealing with personal information. We're not dealing with trade secrets. We're not dealing with other people's data, right? And it's saving you from for me the hours of sitting there playing, recording, and typing it out, and making mistakes along the way. So it's a very quick analysis, but it ports over to anything else. I teach a law at a a data science program at University of Pacific here in the Bay Area, and one of the things I put to them is a an algorithm, machine learning algorithm that lands planes automatically. So I have them go through the way the machine learning model was built. Then I have them talk about negligence, contractual provisions. But what's the point? Is that they are exposed to a very, very high stake thing, landing an airplane. If something goes wrong, you could take the lives of hundreds of people. So how do you approach that? It's a very different thing than what we're doing here with the transcription. And, when it comes to risk, it really is very much kind of the devil's in the details. You just have to look at what's the benefit? What are you trying to do? Where can it go off the rail? And if it does, how bad is that? And literally just, it's almost always bespoke, always contextual, right? And so that's the way I see that risk approach. It's really very, very contextual.
Yeah, it is very context driven. You do have to assess the risk almost on a case by case basis.
Hmm.
It's not going to go away. So I feel like some companies, they're like, let's shut the castle door and not let AI in. But artificial intelligence is probably in almost any technology that you use. If you're on the
Yep.
cloud at all, you're
Yep.
exposed to AI. These features have
Hmm.
seeped into almost any application that you're using. So the idea that somehow you're going to close the castle gate and AI is not going to get in, that's just not real either. So
Well, and if you look at public companies who are supposed to, you know, remain viable, well, in order to do that, they have to adopt AI to stay competitive, to retain customers, to do threat detection. It's a part of doing business. It's just the gasoline engine now, and it's not the hoofs and the legs of the horse. And so it's like you can't close the castle door because you have a separate risk of not competing and now not being able to make up money for your shareholders. So it's baked into the commercial quest of any enterprise.
Now, you've been involved in data science for a long time, and you've been involved in
Yeah.
AI even before the AI gold rush has started with generative AI. I'm excited that it gets people talking about artificial intelligence, even though
Hmm.
I don't know about you, I kind of slap my face when I see some of the things that people post. I'm like, that's not true. That's not right. What are you talking
Yep.
about?
Yep.
What is concerning you now about the way that people talk about AI, or what is something that you would like to educate people, for people who are confused about artificial
Yeah.
intelligence? What do you want to tell them?
Well, it's generally speaking, it's an extension of what you already know and what you already have. It's an extension of the data that you have, of your business purpose. So the idea is that if you think about it from the outset, just like think about privacy by design, right? And that's something that you know very well. Where if you think about it early, it's as easy to do it the right way as it is to do it the wrong way. So if you start out in the right place, it makes it a much more comfortable, manageable, warm and fuzzy topic than if you just rush ahead and try to put the toothpaste back in the tube later. So that's the first thing I would say. The other thing I would say is that don't use AI unless you have a reason to. People try to rush into it and expect something from it. If your data is not good enough, your machine learning algorithm, whether it's generative or standard, what you call GoFi, good old fashioned AI, GoFi, it learns from your data. The algorithms are just equations. They're algorithms. They're no smarter than your data. So you have to understand those things before you jump into the AI fray. And the other thing that I would say is that try to keep it simple because there are a lot of cute ways to use different deep learning and neural nets and so forth, which is fine. But there are some aspects of I don't get under the hood where if you can use a simpler model, it may not be as performant. It's better to do that because at least you know what's going on. So to keep it simple, and and the other thing is the reason you have to keep it simple is because most machine learning projects, when I say machine learning, I'm including generative AI, regression, classification, for those who know something about AI, is in order you have programmers, you have domain experts, you have, IT folks all coming into this effort. Each one has to understand it so that they can provide their input into how well it's going to work, what the problems are going to be. So you have to keep it simple. So focusing on keeping it straightforward and understandable is key. If you start there, you're in great shape.
Right, I agree with that. And then another thing, probably a misconception I want you to help clear up, and that
Hmm.
is people have junk data and they think they're going to throw it into like a AI hopper, and all of a sudden a diamond is going to come out the other end. What are your thoughts about that?
Expecting too much from something, right? It's like they're expecting it to come out with this nice, clean, clear kind of valuable thing. Anytime someone mentions AI, I always have to start out and say, we're going into this thinking it might not be useful. It might not be worth it. Because if your AI, if you don't know what it's doing, it might do things you don't know. Who knows what it's doing if you don't understand it? So I think that if you don't understand it, you are really running a risk. So if you expect a diamond, make sure you know it's going to give you a diamond. Because I think back in the day, the late 2000s, early 2010s, and I'm sure you saw this too, is that this is back in the e-discovery days with using, predictive coding or using natural language processing to find relevant documents and so forth, right? What these companies would do is they would say, well, we'll always give you 80% recall, which is to say we'll always find 80% of the documents that are relevant. That's impossible to know. Or they would just hire software salespeople to come in here who knew nothing about the fact that the data has to be good to begin with. They try to sell something that had no real possibility of having efficacy because they didn't look at it in the first place. So, yeah. So I think, again, you just have to be very clear at the outset. You have to always ask yourself, is this worth it? Do we have what we need? And then you could say, yes, I'm going to get a diamond out of it. That works.
Let's talk a little about governance. So governance
Mm-hmm.
was almost like a dirty word within corporations for a long, long time because it was
Mm-hmm.
something you had to do, like eat your vegetables, and people didn't want to do. Governance projects typically aren't like the marquee moneymaker projects. People think of them more
Mm-hmm.
as like a cost. And
Mm-hmm.
so now that we have people who are really hot and bothered about trying to adopt AI, you have to have that governance conversation with them. And a lot of times
Mm-hmm.
they're like, "Did you eat your vegetables?" They're like, "Well, no." So,
Mm-hmm.
what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think it kind of depends on how you define governance. I generally like to pull back and use the term GRC, governance, risk, and compliance. And feel free to rephrase that for me, by the way. The governance, I've always, the G of the GRC is the internal policies, the internal attitude at the top, that type of thing, of how to govern your data and your operations. The risk is just like we said, you're actually taking something and saying, all right, what's the benefit? What's the risk? Or what's the probability of harm? And you kind of analyze that. Compliance is external thing, laws, regulations external to the enterprise that you kind of have to consider, like regulations, GDPR, and breach notification laws. I think high level is to recognize the reasons why those things are there. So we go right back to really the foundation is the explainability and the simplicity, relatively speaking. So you know what it's doing. Because if you buy a car and it doesn't work, that's a risk because you bought the car to get you from point A to point B and it won't do that. Or it goes too slow or it costs too much. So that's kind of the initial threshold question. But also there are public policy things. We've heard about AI, bias. Are we hiring people disproportionate to the, too much in one class that shouldn't get that bias in their favor or against who they are? Or are we determining a sentence for a criminal based on past information that's going to give them more time than they really deserve? So these are all kind of fairness, public policy questions. They're there for a reason. You want to say governance and you can look at you can say, is it your vegetables? But vegetables can taste good and they're full of nutrients, right? So that's the way I always look at it. It's always an important part of one, your commercial purpose. If your AI is not doing what it's supposed to, that's part of governance, then that's a problem. You want to look at the risk to make sure that you don't wind up paying more for something than you should have to, or create more harm than benefit. And the compliance, you don't want to wind up, you know, class action lawsuit or some other thing. So if you look at the reasons behind it, I think that can help you, one, not look at it as like eating your vegetables or looking at eating your vegetables as something that you can smile about. So that's kind of the way I would put it. Governance, it's all about understanding what's going on, internalizing it on some level, and then coming up with some sort of a plan. That's sort of the big kind of fluffy sentence that you can put around all that, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk a bit about bias in artificial intelligence, right? Part of this is understanding again the risk and how you're using AI
Mm-hmm,
technology
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and what outcome that you're looking for because you don't want to do something that's going to cause like a human harm, right?
Yeah.
Like for example, I guess the example I like to give is let's say you're selling shoes on an e-commerce website and you're saying, well,
Mm-hmm.
let me show Paul blue suede shoes on
Yeah.
a website. And so they're going to show you blue suede shoes, but also some red shoes and some brown shoes. So it's not
Yeah.
harmful. It's like, okay, well, we'll show you
Yeah.
mostly blue. We'll show you other stuff. But
Yeah.
then when you're trying to use AI for things like sentencing people to jail and stuff like that, or trying to
Mm-hmm.
figure out like use a facial recognition system, say, okay, is this person or not? You
Mm-hmm.
really need more precision in those types of things. And it shouldn't
Yeah.
be, well, we think it could be any of these 100 people instead of this person. But what are your thoughts about just AI uses in that way in terms of just thinking about risk and bias?
Well, that's kind of a deep topic. One that I understand. I don't do that area full time. There are people that do it full. It's all they do. I think, bias and fairness, it kind of, like you said, if it's just showing me just blue shoes because it thinks I'm, maybe a little bit colorful in my thinking or something, who cares? It's even though I'm getting biased, it's like, who cares? But I don't think anyone wants to, first of all, be the victim of getting 5 years instead of three because some algorithm inadvertently, well, took data that had bias baked into it because it was looking at historical data, right? That historical data is biased because certain groups were targeted more or certain groups got more sentences than others, right? And so it's biased by its very nature. And so I don't want to have any person, let alone myself, spend a day more in incarceration or spend more in a fine than they should have to. And or conversely, someone who deserves more does not get, right. There's a sense of fairness there. So I think typically you kind of have to look. Really important is the type of data that you have. You have to make sure that you're applying the proper algorithms. There's a lot of things under the hood about how you sample if you're sampling, and what do you consider to be balance or imbalance within classes that you have. When I say classes, like Republican, liberal, you know what I mean, or Hispanic, African American, Caucasian, and so forth. How do you determine what is or isn't fair or biased? And I think that oftentimes is a political thing because what's wrong in one culture may be completely acceptable in another. So I think that there has to be an understanding of the culture, an understanding what the data is and what kind of algorithms you're using, and then you have to look at the results and see if it makes sense. I
Mhm.
probably haven't said anything new, but that's the reality.
No, it's very crystal clear. You're always a clear thinker and you're very fair in the way that you describe things. So I always appreciate
Thank
that
you.
about you for
I
sure.
appreciate that.
Tell me, what are you seeing, maybe surprising to you about the types of challenges that companies are having with data and AI?
Well, I think, well, what comes to my mind from my perspective is that there's a hype cycle. That's nothing new. But as you get down into the weeds more on that, I think people don't know what to do with the risk. They don't know where to start. There's so many things. There's application security. The software that's being used to write the machine learning application is there. Data lineage, data discovery. Where'd your data come from? And now just those two topics are kind of daunting, but you also have privacy enhancing technologies or the ability to identify, well, that's part of the discovery, but you also have model governance platforms. You have data ownership, right? So you have all these things. How do you approach that? What laws apply? What do you need to put in place to make sure that your risk is where it should be and your compliance boxes are ticked off? I think that's the big question right now. And that's place where both of our practice areas are really very valuable. So I think I would say that that's where things are right now is the hype hit, and now people are either they're not addressing it or they're just looking the other way for now. And if they're offering blue shoes on a website, they probably don't have to worry too much. But if they're landing airplanes, it's just people don't know what to do. It's so new. And I just real quick, I'll give you a quick analogy that kind of helps. Is you kind of have to look at normal AI machine learning that is non-generative as like trying to predict where a golf ball is going to go. You got the ball, you've got the club, you've got the wind, you've got the height of the person, right? You've got the whatever else. Can you predict where the ball is going to go if you hit it a certain way? Very straightforward. Generative AI is more like a pinball machine, right? It's contained, but it whacks around and hits all these different things and it hits these flippers and stuff. So I think what you have to do, at least with regard to generative AI, to your question, is think of it like a pinball machine. It's okay. It will work. It looks like this crazy, you know, strapped to a rocket kind of thing, but it is possible to understand what it's doing, to have a sense of what's going on. And so that's sort of the long way of saying, I think that the AI risk right now is really an unknown. No one really knows what to do.
I like that analogy about the pinball machine. I think that's very apt.
Thank you. Yeah.
This is what I think about AI in general. And I want your
Please, I'd
thoughts
love to
about the
hear.
hype. I want your thought about the hype cycle because I have an opinion about that as well. You
Okay,
know,
please.
for me, I think artificial intelligence is a thing that helps you do a thing. It's not the
Yeah,
thing itself, right? So part
absolutely.
of that hype cycle is that people are trying to make it the centerpiece of whatever it is that a company is trying to do, where
Hmm.
really the proper use for it is find something that you want to do and have
Hmm.
AI help enable you do that thing, right? I had a dear friend used to say people don't want technology, they want things that work. So if you can create something to help someone do something that either was hard to do, they weren't able to do, they're
Hmm.
gonna be happy about that, right? But they don't really
Hmm.
care how it happens. So they don't care that it is AI. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think you and I have both lived through the data adoption disruptive time, I guess. Then the AI piece, as it was the elephant in the room at that time, was discovery that you can now search millions of documents and not have someone look at each document, one at a time. But I always liken it to this. Where am I going? So if I'm going next door, do I need a car? No. If I'm going 2 blocks to the park, do I need a car? Probably not. If I'm going to the store that's a mile away, do I need a car? Probably. One, because it's far enough that it warrants taking the car, right? And I might have groceries I need to put in the back. So you don't just, or now let's say I want to go to Los Angeles for a weekend. Am I going to drive? Probably take a plane. You, you don't want to take a plane to your neighbor's house, right? So it's the same kind of thing. What are you doing it? What are you doing and why? So start out by saying, am I going to walk? Am I going to drive? Or am I going to fly? Or am I going to run or ride a bike? So I think that's always been for me the way to think about AI. If there's no reason to use it, then don't. If things are working fine, why add complexity where you don't have to? And the other question is, of course, if I'm going to take my car, is the car working? It's going to break down. Am I going to run a stop sign and kill someone? We get on an airplane, is it made by Boeing or not? You know, the
Right,
joke
right.
there being right. So
Yes, yes.
that's the way I look at hypes. That's the way I look at AI and anything that's technical is like you said, it helps a thing do a thing, which is great. That's about as technical as you're ever going to get, I think. But it's like people say, "Oh gosh, there's this brand new shiny Porsche. I want to own one." Well, if you live in a very small town where you're never going to be able to use it, what's the point? If it's just to show it off. So that's kind of you know, a very Sesame Street way of putting things. But that's the way I try to look at it because you can't walk AI into a problem. You just can't.
Yeah,
You have to, like we said earlier, you kind of have to start and work your way out.
that's true. Well, let's talk about the hype cycle. I think there's always a hype cycle when people feel like you're using a technology in a new or different way. And
Mhm.
obviously the media likes that, right? Because, they can get
Mhm.
eyeballs on stuff. People think, okay, well, this hype cycle, what's going to happen is that people are going to not want to use AI and then they're going to go back to the olden days. And that's just not going to happen. But what are your thoughts?
No, that's a great question, and I think we've touched on facets of it along the way here. I think I do think that we learned our lessons from the last AI hype cycle, if you will. I think we all sort of said, "Oh yeah, here's AI again. Hey, it's just another." There was a little bit of once bitten, twice shy. So I think there was some skepticism baked in going in. But when people saw that you could write an entire paper with just a few sentences with a prompt, or that you could ask it to summarize something, well, it's a wow factor. I mean, it is the brightest, shiniest object we've seen in a long time. And there are things that are being done that are like, talking. This isn't generative, that the app that does the transcription, but it's the same analogy is that people see that and there is FOMO, fear of missing out, which causes some of the hype cycle, is that they figure, well, one, can I make a living at it? Two, can I make a startup from it? Or can I use it to cut costs in my enterprise and make myself look good? Can I use it to increase revenue and profit? Can I use it to compete? Right. So all these things cause people to kind of get their face shoved in it. because they have to. And so I think that it's not as bad as it was in the late 2000s, early 2010s, but I think that the the expectation, alluding to your thing with the diamond earlier, is that you really have to understand what the technology is capable of and what it does. And it's frankly, it's not any smarter than your data, period. You have human review and stuff, but I think that the hype cycle, if you look at it collectively, is it's I think it's going to be here to stay. I think it's going to become a new part of how life is done, just like the internet, just like search engines, just like SaaS tools. They're all here, and we're living with them and using them every day. I think generative AI is going to find that place in a bumpy but ultimately net gain way. It just seems that that's the case, despite you're dealing with a pinball machine, despite that you have what is really something that's like a beehive. It is manageable. The pinball machine is contained. That ball stays in that little environment. You got the little flippers and stuff. It works. Put a quarter in and you have fun. So generative AI tool, whether it's for audio or visual or multimodal or text, I think we're going to find a net gain proliferation.
I agree with that. I think stories of the demise, especially generative AI, are greatly exaggerated. I don't think it will go away. I think, I think artificial intelligence like that will have more of a horizontal impact on industries where
I
it will
agree with you.
be imbued in a lot of different little ways that maybe aren't
Yeah.
kind of marquee, rah-rah, front and center types of use cases, but it'll be kind of baked in to a lot of stuff that we're going to be doing in the future. And so I think part of that settling down is for hopefully not people saying it's going to end the world in 2 years or it's going to cure
Hmm.
cancer, but maybe it helps someone that maybe did a task that was 50 steps and now it's 10 steps,
Hmm.
right? Or it's
Yes.
helping, someone who, like for this transcription example, instead of me typing, listening to the audio and typing it out myself and having something that can help me that I can just tweak or whatever and use and kind of go on and do something else.
Exactly. And I couldn't agree with you more. I think everything you said, from my perspective, completely lines up with everything that I've mentioned. It is going to be very highly dependent on the vertical, the domain, because the type of AI you use to transcribe audio is very different than the one that's going to analyze an MR, an X-ray for some sort of cancer, and which is going to be different than the one that helps you interact with a customer online, right? AI is very dependent on the use and the data that you have. And so I think you're absolutely right. I do think that there's hype. There's people who out there who, hucksters and people who don't think and rush in. I do know there's been a lot of, I mean, here in Silicon Valley, so we go to a lot of investor events here just because they're fun to attend, but there's a lot of money that went into things just on the hype, and people lost money. Investors lost money because they said, "Oh, AI, great, here." So there's the problem, I think. But I agree with you. I want to put a question to you. So you're the data diva. You're a privacy expert. I mean, you're more than. I mean, you're broader than that. Seeing privacy, saying a lot. So as you've kind of gone through your ascension in your path with privacy, can you compare the growth and maturation of privacy with the AI? Is there a similarity with the two? Because I think it parallels in a lot of ways. And I think that for you, it's easy to kind of glean from your past things that with regards to the AI. Is there an answer to
Wow, you always ask me the deep questions. That's why we're great friends.
that?
I think
Yes.
that there are some parallels. So for me, I've always been interested in how data moves, how it flows in
Hmm.
systems. And so
Hmm.
part of that is what you can do with data, what you should do, what you shouldn't do, right? So I
Hmm.
think
Hmm.
those questions come even more into focus and more into view when you bring AI in. So now
Hmm.
you have technologies that can do things at scale that
Hmm.
can be good or bad, right? So
Mhm.
you can accelerate bad things, you can compound bad things, but you can also compound or exponentially speed up good things. So for me, my personal interest in privacy, I was hoping people would be more interested in it when I was interested in it when I started it many years ago. But I'm
Mhm.
happy that I think part of privacy, the reason why people started thinking about it more is because it did move more into that compliance space
Mhm.
where it became more like, oh my God, we're going to get fined. Not like, oh, let's
Mhm.
have a warm and fuzzy conversation about doing the right thing and ethics, right? But
Mhm.
I think that conversation is now joining together with AI
Mhm.
because now companies are trying to or have the capabilities to do things with data in ways that they never did before. And so it just
Mhm.
raises those questions. Like
Mhm.
before, they weren't capable of doing some of the stuff. And now, because of AI, you're capable of doing things that could be really good or really bad as it relates
Mhm.
to privacy. So for me, I think it just
Mhm.
elevates that conversation. I think it does
Mhm.
kind of track together and be intertwined together.
That's very interesting. Yeah. I kind of thought there was something, there's clearly something there, but your perspective, because I know you're very prolific and very well placed. And so it's always good to hear your thoughts on that.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. If it were the world according to you, Paul, and we did everything you said, what would be your wish for either AI or privacy anywhere in the world, whether that be regulation, human behavior, or technology?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. I think the first thing is to have proper expectation, but I think there's downside to AI as well. Obviously, there's the extreme cases of the Terminator 2, where it gets its own sort of sense of itself and you know attacking things that thinks are not good and just being headless in a sense. But there's also it's taking people's jobs. A lot of things that you would hire out on, let's say, Fiverr or Upwork or some of these other platforms now are being done by AI exclusively, generating PowerPoint presentations or even pictures, illustrations, brochures. It impacts human beings. And I think on some level, it could impact the balance of wealth. I'm going way off. Well, on some level, going kind of go off the rail here, but let's just be real that it has that impact. There's a collective effect of any new capability. And so I would hope that we would learn to grow in a way with AI or any technology that really accommodates all of us, accommodates the bigger picture. That's fair. That is used, it's like a gun, can be used to defend yourself or to, you know, commit a murder. And so that would be the first thing, is to have this sort of ethical awareness of the impact that it has. And then the other piece would be to say, let's all learn what we can. I think that's the biggest piece that's missing, is the more you understand it, the more you can get it to work. So I guess those would be my two short answers. I could go on, but I think having expectations that are realistic, having any AI or machine learning or any technological advancement be done in a way that is not clunky.
I like those answers. I guess maybe I'll expand upon your dream,
Please,
and your
please
wish.
do. Sure.
And that is because I feel because of the rapid advancement and the rapid adoption of AI that people are going to need to be educated more often, maybe in
Mm-hmm.
incremental ways, and not like
Mm-hmm.
artificial intelligence isn't like a set it and forget it type of thing. So it has to be
Yeah.
more human involvement in it. It's more
Mm-hmm.
tuning, more
Mm-hmm.
more care and feeding, more thinking
Mm-hmm.
about what happens to the data, all the way through the life cycle. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think corporations haven't traditionally done training that way or kind of
Mm-mm.
thought about problems in that way. So I think this would be
Mm-mm.
a new frontier. The companies that really adopt that way of thinking will be, far ahead of everyone else in the future. What do you think?
Mm-hmm. I totally agree with you. I think it's humans, really AI is enabling human the human quest, right? That's what it's there for. And I, I, I think we have to look at it from that standpoint. And yeah, I mean, if people don't know how to use it, or don't understand its risk on a daily use of it basis. Like here to shadow AI, right? Where people are spinning up AI tools without their governance department knowing about it, right? Or they're using it in a way that's risky. Like they're entering trade secret information into a prompt, and something else is picking up that trade secret information, right? And now that's in some model somewhere. So now your trade secret's gone. So it's people understanding how it works and how to use it properly is, I think, really important, because that's where things go off the rail, I think, most of the time, you know.
I agree with that. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been
My
tremendous.
pleasure.
It's great. I'm so glad we were able to chat, and many years in the making for us to have this conversation, but I'm happy we're having it now.
I,
You're right at the right place at the right time. You're in my stratosphere, so I can reach out to you anytime.
and I should also thank you, because I had you on our podcast, I think it's a year and a half ago now. But thank you. It's my pleasure, and anytime. And we'd love to have you back on ours as well. And again, thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts and be on your podcast. It's always good to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, and we'll talk soon for sure.
All right. Thank you, Dick.
You're welcome.